Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review, so hopefully you find this one interesting. This movie is a horror film from the USA, English language, released in the year 2009, directed by Craig Singer, and this film is called Perkins 14. So Perkins 14 is set in this sleepy community. You've got this sheriff who's been besieged by guilt because 10 years previous there was a serial killer who kidnapped a lot of children, and one of the children was in fact his son. And so he believes that he could have investigated this a lot more, he could have tried a lot harder in order to try and retrieve his son, but he didn't. And so this is having a devastating effect on his wife and his teenage daughter. They're keeping their distance, and this is really something that is controlling them with a lot of fear and regret. And so it's a very sad sort of atmosphere that this sheriff has created, but that atmosphere is about to become very intense when he realizes that he might have stumbled onto something that is going to lead him to his son. And so on this evening he's doing the patrol in the station, and he's introduced to a pharmacist who is in the waiting cell, and the pharmacist is actually giving off a vibe that maybe that he is in fact the serial killer. He's responsible for the disappearance of his son. And so he's adamant that this guy knows a lot more than he's letting on, but the people around the sheriff believe that the sheriff is just desperately after answers and he's making things up. But so as the sheriff continues to interrogate this pharmacist, the more he realizes, okay, this is the man I want. But unfortunately, there is a terrifying truth behind this pharmacist that is not only going to put the sheriff's life in danger, but all the community as well. And so what that truth is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Perkins 14. I come into this movie with very limited expectations. When I saw the trailer I thought to myself, okay, this looks like a typical low budget zombie-like horror film, is that it's going to be splashed with brutal gore, and it was pretty much, that was all there's going to be to it. And so I thought, okay, well, no expectations, at least hopefully there's going to be really good kills, and it would make a fairly decent 90 minutes. And so it was very cheap, and I wasn't really risking much, and so having no expectations whatsoever made it even more surprising, because I actually really like Perkins 14. I know a lot of people didn't like this movie. They said it was ridiculous, but what I loved about Craig Singer's work was the fact that he's trying something new. He's trying to throw a bit of creativity within the very tied subgenre of zombies. As that zombie work, you see a lot of movies, low-budget horror films, that just rely on mindless killing machines and really excessive gore and nothing else. But what I liked about Perkins 14 was there was actually concentration within the characters. You've got this sheriff who was absolutely torn apart by what happened, and I could feel the emotion. I could feel the very good chemistry between the family and how they were just going through a really tough time. They loved each other, but it shows you the traumatic effect of losing a loved one, and you didn't know whether or not this child was in fact dead or alive, and not knowing and no closure, it forces a family to stay put. They don't really move forward. You can't move forward. It's a lot easier said than done, and I could actually feel that genuine pain. And so it does set up a very promising aspect as far as caring for these characters. And so when the bad things are happening, you don't necessarily want bad things to happen to these people. And so it does give the gore and it does give the horror set pieces that much more of an impact than you would with a movie that doesn't rely on characters, basically characters that are just there for cannon fodder, just to be torn apart. And you don't feel the pain because you don't feel as though these are people. But I actually thought that Craig Singer generated characters that I believe I could have actually known, I could have been befriended, as that this is a family that is a typical family, but the traumatic events of the past is something that you immediately get a connection with, and I really wanted to actually know the mystery behind what was going on. And so I thought the first quarter of this movie is fantastic, and that fantastic quarter was down to the fact that these characters were actually concentrated on. You got this pharmacist who was very eerie, very creepy. You didn't know whether or not he was in fact involved in these serial killings, and there's a lot of curiosity there, a lot of questions that actually create a lot of suspense, that you don't know if the sheriff is going insane or in fact the pharmacist is that evil presence. And so the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty, it does create that level of discomfort. There's no control, there's no safety barrier, and that's something I really liked. I thought it was genuinely creepy stuff, and this is something that you want from a horror film. I thought the cinematography was excellent, I thought the soundtrack was fantastic, and it just creates that melancholic mood that the movie has from start to finish. I thought that the mood was very consistent, and it really paid a lot of respect, as I said, to these characters and what the plight of these characters right up until the very shocking sort of ending. So you've got gore. Now this movie is very, very, very brutal, and it's even more brutal based on the fact that these characters are people that you don't necessarily love and adore, but you can see that they're human beings, and so these human beings aren't fuzzy faces, they aren't cannon fodder, so it just gives the horror aspect aspect even more impact. And as I said, the gore really hits you hard, and it's very excessive, and it is very, very well done. There's a lot of practical effects, and so if you are a gore hound, I think Perkins 14 is a movie that you're going to absolutely love. And so I love that aspect. I love the fact that it was very brutal, but the brutality is complemented by stuff that is very hard to do, and that is creating a vibe, creating an atmosphere, and on top of that, creating sympathetic characters. And so these sympathetic characters wouldn't have worked without good performances, and I thought the performances from all the actors, especially for this type of film, was top-notch. There were moments here and there that I thought was a little bit iffy, but overall it was very passable. And so you wouldn't have got this connection with the characters if the acting wasn't up to a standard. And so that was all very good. And as I said, the soundtrack and the production, fantastic. The gore was fantastic. The makeup effects when you see what is actually going on was great. But what I loved about it, as I said, and I'll say it again, I'll say it time and time again, that the creativity is what really got me. Is that, okay, this is a movie that's not just flogging a cash cow. This is a movie that's genuinely trying to create something of its own, making its own shadow, and this is a breath of fresh air. This is everything that a horror fan wants. Is that, okay, if you take risks and it doesn't work out, okay, well, I applaud you for taking that risk, for taking that creativity, and showing us that horror directors out there aren't just doing the same thing over and over and over. And so this is a zombie film, but it was a different kind of zombie film, and that was by far the biggest plus to Perkins 14. The problem with Perkins 14 is that it does get a little bit silly, especially towards the last quarter, but I can forgive that because it is a movie that's not taking itself to a point where it wants to win awards, but it takes itself seriously enough to really get into the emotion of what's going on, and at the same time the genuine fear factor that the film has to complement the very gory set pieces. And so it's a complete horror film. As I said, it's not perfect. There are problems, but they're minuscule problems compared to the positives that the movie has, and as a result of that, I'm going to give Perkins 14 3.5 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later. Bye.